Good morning and welcome to Elevenses with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. Now, if you were watching my live Elevenses webcast this morning on Facebook, you'll have known that my interview, which I was attempting to run with Kate Jennings of Hideout Leather, was somewhat disrupted by the broadband keep dropping out. So what I've done is I've just basically put a new intro onto the full interview and spliced them together, and this is what's uploaded now to YouTube. So if you did watch it on Facebook this morning, apologies for the problems. The broadband problem has now been reported and hopefully will be resolved in time for the next show, but this is the full interview without the interruptions. Hi and welcome everybody again. We're interviewing Kate Jennings today of Hideout Leathers. You probably not have heard of Hideout. They've been around for quite a long time. Kate's going to tell us rather more about the history than I know. But I thought it'd be interesting today, having followed on from Paul Varnsbury and Chris Hurren, who talked about the theoretical side of the CE standards for protective clothing and really concentrated on textiles. I thought it would be useful to talk to somebody who actually manufactures high standard clothing and also to look at the leather clothing as well today. So over to you, Kate. Perhaps if you don't mind, you could tell us a little bit about your background in how you got into bike clothing generally. I know Hideout have been around since at least the 1980s and were originally making leathers for the track, but what's your background? How did you get involved with them?
So yes, I basically did a fashion degree, so completely nothing to do with motorbikes, never had ridden a motorbike in my life. I needed some leather clothing made and went to the original guy, Peter Hamlet, who owned the company at the time, to get some garments made. So I was actually a customer first. Ended up spending quite a lot of time with him working on these particular fashion garments and got to know them quite well. Went back to finish my fashion degree and needed a job for the summer. So I thought, oh, no, I'll go back. Really enjoyed the challenge. It was a completely different different kind of challenge to my normal fashion sort of design, being in that it was actually had to be protective and it was much easier or nicer people to actually work with as well than a lot of the fashion industry that I was working with at the time. So kind of went back home to reevaluate my time and what I was going to do next. And then here I am 25 odd years later now, owning and running the business myself. So obviously enjoyed it very much.
Okay, that's certainly a very interesting route in. That's not the normal way to get into motorcycling. So, okay, from your fashion background, how did you find the challenge of actually moving on to providing sort of a race standard leather suit? Did the skills that you had been given in your degree course actually suit what you were doing with the leathers? What kind of skills and craftsmanship are needed for a leather suit?
Yeah, so as I say, having done pattern design and pattern cutting and fitting for fashion work, which obviously is mainly standing and sitting, to try and then have to transfer that into a skill for actually riding different types of motorbikes. Obviously it's not just the full race spec, we have from the sort of sit up and beg bikes to the full out on drag bikes, which the hands are up in the air. And obviously we also work a lot with the guys on the sidecar teams. So again, that's a completely different fit for the suit than actually a normal solo rider would be as well. So because my interest was about the technical side and how to cut the pattern to work, it really transposed quite easily into, because it doesn't really matter whether you're standing or sitting or riding a motorbike or whatever you're doing, the actual application of the actual pattern cutting side is exactly the same. So it was just a far more interesting challenge, because not only have you got to be able to stand up and sit down, but you've also got to be able to move about. So trying to get one garment to do all of those different aspects is far more of a challenge than you'd ever get in the fashion world. So that's why it was really enjoyable. And I think also for me, it was a case of with regard to everyday fashion, it's obviously is not as important for those people to actually be saved. You know, we're actually within, God, I've totally and utterly, sorry, excuse me, got my words all muxed up there. But what I'm trying to say is that when you're doing actually a technical garment, and the application of that technical garment is actually going to potentially save someone's life, it's far more rewarding than trying to do something that just looks pretty and that has no substance to it. So what was really then interesting for me was to learn about the different parts of the leather that we use and different parts of the suits. So obviously we need to make sure that we've got good strong leather in all of the impact areas. And when I originally sort of went through to learn about this, it was very much back in the day when the suits were all leather. They were completely made of leather, top to toe. And as time has progressed, we've kind of got to this stage where you've got a lot more technical fabrics that are also going into the actual production of it as well. So it's really interesting.
That actually kind of covers some of the next question I was going to ask you, because I was going to ask how the design has changed over the years, but you kind of answered that question to some extent. I mean, certainly the suit that I had made to measure back in '85, which I'll talk a little bit about later, that was, as you say, it was head to toe leather. Everything, including the sort of the really low risk zones like the insides of the thighs, were made of leather, and oddly enough, that's where the suit wore out as well. But the more recent suit I've got has patches of sort of stretchy, non-abrasion resistant material, but they're in the places where you're not going to sort of suffer an impact injury, like in the armpit. So yes, I can see that's changed. How did you design the suits to give a sort of decent standard of crash resistance? What was your frame of reference, and then how have you worked to sort of work towards the CE standards?
So, I mean, obviously, originally we worked with Dr. Woods in the early 90s. I think my first job was actually a box of gloves, which he was at that point, he'd set all the standards for the suits. So he was now looking to really try and sort of standard for gloves. So one of my first jobs was to have to go through this box of gloves and work out where the impact zones were and at what speed they were actually was the impact. So everyone had obviously sent in these gloves for analysis, and I'm presuming he'd done quite a bit of work with that originally with the suits. But with the suits, he'd obviously already sorted out all of those impact zones. And when I saw the gloves, you could really easily, quite quickly see. I mean, I think the main thing that came out from that experiment was that most instances of crashes under 40 miles an hour, the palms took the brunt of most of the impact, whereas over that, it then ended up being the knuckle. And that was really the start of all the knuckle protection coming in on the gloves at that point, because you can see the benefit of that. So really, the most important thing is experience, and 25 years of seeing crashed leathers. Unfortunately, I probably see the worst part of our industry, because I'm putting people back together, and sadly, quite often, people once they've actually hurt themselves, say, right, that's it, I'm now going to spend some money and I'm going to do it properly, and then they come and see me, which is a bit, I wish I could get them before they did that and spend the money and do it properly in the first instance. But a lot of people find that they don't realize the importance, I think, of decent kit until it's possibly a little bit too late. But with my experience of seeing crashed leathers all the time, you see the areas that you need the extra zones in, and you could quite quickly see how Dr. Wood's come to his conclusion of zoning the body into areas. So what we would do is make sure that in all the zone ones where you've got that's your first port of impact, usually with the ground, is that you have not only a good single layer of leather, but you always double that layer up. And over the years, originally it would have just been 2 layers of leather, because that was what was around, and possibly we'll get to that later, but with your suits that you had made, back in the day, it was very much all double leather, so it was very stiff and very heavy, whereas now we've moved very much forward to lighter fabric, Kevlar fabrics, which we then put into those impact areas, to obviously ensure that you don't go through at that point. So yeah, experience is the best way of seeing exactly where we need to make sure that the impact areas are definitely met.
Yeah, right. I certainly know that Roderick Woods tested a lot of kit. He saw a lot of kit that was damaged, and that was what enabled him to sort of make his database of those damaged areas. How do you ensure that you maintain your standards? Obviously you're building to a high standard, but how do you make sure that you actually keep building to that standard?
That's it. So my girls that work for me have all are fully trained. Most of them would not really go on to finishing a garment completely until they've worked here for about 3 years, because the method of manufacture has to be spot on for every single suit. Our reputation is based on the fact that we cannot have one suit fail, and touch wood, so far with stringent sort of procedures in place to make sure that every aspect of the build, from the cutting, so it's all double checked, so all the leather is checked to make sure that there's no weaknesses in the leather. Then we make sure, obviously, when it goes through each of the different stages that we're making the suit, there's definite checks to ensure that it's done at a completely high standard. But it's and that's the thing that I think with a small manufacturing team you can keep on top, and you can make sure that each and every part of that is stringently adhered to.
I think that probably leads us into the next question as well. Obviously, a lot of manufacturers of motorcycle garments don't actually manufacture them at all. They outsource the build of those garments. They might design them, but the build itself goes off abroad somewhere, a lot off to the obviously Pakistan and countries like that. Have you ever considered outsourcing your manufacture for the reasons that other manufacturers do?
I haven't really. I'm a bit of a control freak, really. So I like to make sure that everything is in-house, and I think as a small independent business, that's how we will retain that quality and assurance to our customers that every single garment, when it leaves here, it is to the highest quality that we can achieve, or that is achievable, and I think as soon as you start getting other people to manufacture your kit, you then start to dilute that, and also we found that you know, sourcing fabrics and keeping the quality, the only way of doing that is to keep it in-house. You see so much of things that when you send a sample, you get a sample made, you get one back, it's absolutely beautiful, but before you know it, they've sourced the fabric that isn't properly what it should be. So at least we can make sure that the thread, every fabric that we use is actually the best quality that we can get.
Okay. What are the pros and cons of a made-to-measure suit, such as you're making, versus something off the shelf?
Well, there's no real comparison. I think if you talk to anyone that's had something made, they kind of wish they'd done it years ago, because I think we can all look in our wardrobes and find, you know, thousands of pounds worth of kit over our biking lives that doesn't quite do what you want it to do, or it's not quite doesn't fit here. It's always a bit of a compromise, and for me, the most, you know, we talk about having the leather to be, you know, the safest possible and the best quality. I could actually, you know, build a bulletproof suit, but if it doesn't fit you, it can still be quite as dangerous. And there's only a few people that are very lucky that they can just walk in and buy something completely off the shelf with no adjustments. And as I say, the most important thing is all the armour is actually in the right place. And so many times, you know, you're walking around shows and things, and I see such ill-fitting garments, and it horrifies me, because, you know, what people will put up with, or they think that is right. All my customers that come to see me, I always say, you know, expect to really hate me for the first 2 or 3 weeks or months sometimes of buying a new, especially leather suit. It's essentially like buying a new pair of shoes, but, you know, you're encasing your entire body in it. So it does take some time to bed in, but once it is, if everything is in the right place, there is no comparison to having something that properly fits you.
Yeah, I would go with that. I had a set of Manx leathers for quite a few years. I think I probably ordered them in 1985, so we're going back a few years there. And as you were saying earlier, they were sort of leather from one end to the other, and they were heavy, and they took a long time to break in. The real problem was that even though they were made to measure, they were never desperately comfortable, even before the waistline on the leathers mysteriously shrank. That was very strange.
Yeah,
Um,
they definitely do shrink.
and I actually got heat exhaustion one day wearing them. I was down in the south of France in the middle of summer. The temperature hit 30 plus Celsius. Looking back, they probably weren't a great choice for a road rider. How do you approach that necessary compromise between protection and comfort? That was certainly something Chris was talking about the other week.
I mean, I think the most important thing is to obviously quantify your customer. You know, if you'd have come to me and said, Kate, actually, I want a one-piece suit, but I want to drive down to the south of France in 30-degree plus heat, I'd say, yeah, a leather black, especially, was it black? You know,
It was.
or dark.
It was actually mostly white with blue, rather nice.
I thought it was a proper 80s retro.
Yeah. Do you remember the racer called Phil Mellor?
Vaguely.
It was yeah, it was actually his suit, but the colours reversed. I reversed the colours.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
That's well, I think you know, that's where we go back to also what we were saying earlier about how the fabrics have, you know, improved over the years. All you can do really with leather is you can perforate it, and you can put as much stretch into it, and as obviously keep it in as cool, you know, lighter colour as possible. But when you get to those sorts of heat, it is, I think, also about weight. And with leather, it is a heavy garment. So, and whether it's more of a psychological thing or not, I think the fact that you're carrying this whole suit around with you does add to that sort of exhaustion type part to it. So we do a lot of kangaroo. We use a lot of kangaroo leather for people who still are Puritans, who still want to have a leather suit, but they want to go and do those sort of southern European trips in the summer. And the only way to do it is to perforate the hell out of it, every panel that we can do. Yes, it is a compromise, but it's a measured compromise. We try to keep those, or the more of the actual ventilation in the less impact areas. And you can still have a wider, like an inch squared perforation, even on your impact areas. So that allows as much air in as you can possibly get. But I think always the thing with leather is getting your base layers right. And I think over the years, we've really started to understand this now. And it doesn't really matter what you put on over the top. If you don't get your base layers correct, if you wear a cotton t-shirt underneath a leather suit, it's going to be sopping wet. And so you're going to be definitely overheat. So today, with all the modern sort of more wicking fabrics, if you wear that underneath your one-piece suit, you're going to be far more comfortable. And so that's, if that was you or my customer saying that that's what you wanted to do, as I say, the way to do it is to get it in kangaroo, which pretty much takes about 30% of the weight as well off the suit. Get it as lighter coloured as possible, and then perforate it as much as possible. But as I say, if you don't wear those base layers, you're still going to be very hot. The thing is it's always very difficult, isn't it? Because it's about getting cool air in. And over 30 degrees, we know it's not cool air that's going in anyway. So it's always a bit of a compromise.
Yeah, okay, that makes good sense. I hadn't realised that kangaroo leather was that much lighter. I must admit that's a news to me. Do you have any insights then on the way that leathers perform on the road versus on the track? We've just sort of talked about the separate design requirements of those two uses.
Yes, because obviously, because we do such a comprehensive repair service, I see a lot of both track and road accidents. And what you're more likely to see on the track is a lot of abrasion. You slide for far longer. And that's where then the fit comes in, because essentially what we're trying to do with a one-piece suit is make it as tight as possible so that the leather doesn't fold over, because at any point if you're sliding on something that's folded, you're obviously going to abrade that a lot quicker. So you're trying to essentially create a skin. And also that means that we're keeping all of the armour in place, so it's sort of much tighter, so the armour can't swivel around. Because if you're sliding for a long time, the leather tends to grab on the tarmac and pull around. So obviously we don't want that. We want to make sure that you're sliding on as much of a smoother surface as you possibly can be. Whereas obviously on the road, you've got a lot more sort of furniture and other obstacles in your way, so you're not likely to slide as far. And this is where sometimes the misnomer comes, because people think because they're on the road, they don't need the level of protection that you would do on the track. But, I think what you see quite a lot of is on the track, once you slide, you bounce. So you're not digging in and sliding heavy, you're being spat around. Whereas on the road, you're more likely to actually dig into the the tarmac. The actual tarmac surfaces are a lot more abrasion, or have a lot more abrasion on them than the track as well. And as I say, then you kind of need to make sure with the road that you've got decent armour and decent back protector because of the furniture, whereas a lot of people seem to think that you only need it really on the track, but it's probably more important on the road.
Okay, a couple of interesting points there. The folding over. Yeah, I discovered that for myself, as I told Chris last week. When I was young, poor, invulnerable and stupid, I was wearing a pair of Levi's on my bike, my first 125, and fell off overtaking the electric milk float one day, probably no more than about 25 miles an hour. But what happened was the denim folded on the thigh where I was sliding, and it came apart more or less from the hip to my knee. So I then had an interesting experience in the medical centre at university, having the damage sort of repaired. The body armour as well, that's something that I suspect that most riders probably do anticipate that their body armour on the road is going to do probably more than it really can in a big impact. That's not something I really want to go into today, but yeah, that's obviously another difference from the days of my Manx leather suit, when I don't think there was any body armour in it at all, if I remember correctly. I tried to wedge some in after the event a few years later, but that was probably one of the reasons it was never very comfortable. So how long does it actually take you to make a made-to-measure suit?
So from the actual manufacturing, so obviously we have to measure and do all of that side as well. So that's probably only about an hour or so. And then I do a pattern. So we do a full pattern, and then we cut it, and then we have to make it. So all of that process takes between 25 and 35 hours per garment. So it's very labour intensive.
Right. Okay. So that certainly accounts for the cost of a made-to-measure suit. When you're repairing damage, is it easy to patch in bits that have got holes in?
With the leather, depending on how you would, or how cost effective you want to make the actual job, mostly with race leathers, yes, we would just patch it. We've got to make sure that we don't over patch, because we don't want to make it like a patchwork quilt. So we have to make sure that the actual strength is still there. And usually we would patch it from underneath and on top to make sure, obviously, that area isn't then vulnerable the next time. So.
Okay, yes, I mean the patchwork quilt. I've seen leathers, sort of market stall leathers. Let's put it that way. I'll be polite, won't name any names, but I've seen patchwork quilt leathers that are new off the shelf. So yeah, getting the seams in the right place is obviously a very important thing. So how does a two-piece suit compare with a one-piece in terms of integrity when you do crash?
Well, this is the thing with the one piece. Obviously, it's the safest thing that you can possibly have. However, most two pieces, or especially ones that are allowed to even be used on track days these days, have to have a 360 zip or full joining zip. And as long as that zip is a good tough zip, we would be looking at something like a number 10, which is quite a thick coil zip, because they're obviously for strength. If the two fit together properly, it's pretty much, I mean, I've in my career, I've never had a two-piece jacket come off the trouser, but I have seen other manufacturers where the jacket isn't quite fitted onto the trouser, or the jacket has just got a fabric panel that holds the zip to it. If the jacket doesn't fit properly, it can actually flip up, and then obviously your torso is then exposed. So as long as it's a good fit, a two-piece is a good sort of second best, though, to your one-piece suit.
That's a good point about the leather actually going over the top of a zip that's attached to fabric. I hadn't thought of that, but obviously, um, a lot of people go for a sort of big overlap on a jacket over the top of the trousers, and if you've got a big overlap, then there's a large amount of material which could fold away, leaving that zip exposed. That's a good point, and perhaps something we should look out for when we're thinking about two-piece suits. Your products, I'm sure you won't mind me saying this, are towards the top end of the price range. Not everyone can afford top of the range kit. How do you feel about the protection offered by a sort of more budget suit? Do you feel that they can do a reasonable job? I'm talking road riders here, really, rather than track riders. And
Yeah.
what should we be looking for as we choose leather bike kit?
Well, as I say, I think, is to spend as much money as you possibly can. I always think you've got to think of your kit like you do your insurance policy, really, is that you've looked around, you've researched, you've asked your mates, you've seen, forums on the internet, and you've hoped that you've picked the right one, and you hope that you're never going to find out how good that actual policy is. But if you do, then you want to make sure that you've spent as much money, because the last thing you kind of want to be doing is, well, you're actually sliding down the road, is at that point you pay anything to have something decent. So to prevent that, I think especially with leathers, there are quite a few things that you can be looking out for. Generally, a hide of leather costs about £100. So that's just the material cost. So if your jacket is £100, you're not going to be able to be getting the best quality leather jacket. So, a decent leather jacket is going to be at least £350, £400 plus before you've even started. And there are, the Furigans a good make. Held do some good products, but it comes down to the consumer really going into the store and looking inside. A lot of the garments you can sort of see inside and how it's made. You're definitely looking for double layers in your shoulders, elbows, decent back protector. The leather as well all the seams should be stitched twice inside. This is what they call twin stitching, so that if one goes, you've kind of got a backup stitch, and those sort of things you can usually see inside the suits, especially, but even the jackets, just to make sure that they've got that. But then I think also what you've got to make sure is it's about fit, and going somewhere reputable that knows what they're doing and what they're looking for, to make sure that you don't get the armor shouldn't be rolling around. If you can bend your arm and still feel your elbow, that's generally the elbow is the bit that's going to be hitting the ground if you do come off. So the whole it should be a fitted garment. So the fit is just as important, really, as everything else.
Okay. On the point you just made about the seams, what I'm assuming that you're saying is what we shouldn't be doing is buying things with a seam like that in an exposed place, but we should be looking at a seam which wraps over and is stitched through like that.
That's right. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. And it's got to have two rows inside. I'll thought that.
Okay. You also offer a cleaning service, so you can probably tell us quite a bit about how to care for a leather kit. Again, I can remember years ago when I used to wear a leather jacket in the rain and then just hang it in the airing cupboard to dry it out, and a year or so later I wondered why it was cracked. You're probably going to tell me that wasn't the best way to care for it.
That's it. I mean, leather actually has what they call a protein, but it's more like a fat, or acts like a fat inside it. And if it gets wet, so if it gets wet from the rain, or your moisture actually starts to dry the leather out, So we need to put those sort of moistures back into the leather. And the important thing for that really is that the leather is made up of lots of fibers, and those fibers are knitted together with this collagen, which is the thing that keeps it strong. So what you find is you're actually weakening the leather. I mean, eventually it would actually almost go like a plastic, and it would be so brittle that it would break. And that's because these fibers just have got no elasticity to them anymore. So we need to feed the leather. And usually that's a cream. I sort of try and get my customers to steer away from a lot of the oils and a lot of the waxes, because these tend to sit on the surface of the leather. They look good, they make it shiny, and it looks pretty, but it's not actually feeding the leather itself to keep that collagen and keep that really, as I say, that the subtlety of the leather needs to be put in. But as you say, you know, leather can start to smell. It will take, and that's again why it's important to wear your base layers, so you're protecting the leather itself from that sort of damage. We have an atomizer here, and it was a little trick from a company that we did some work for, that they repair vintage handbags, and they showed me how to make this atomizer, which is a little box, and all of our repairs go into this little box and get atomized, and that basically takes away the bacteria, so it takes away the smell. So we do that, and then we feed them, and then we clean the leather as well and buff it up, and then you can also refinish leather. That's why that's for me the beauty of leather really, is the fact that when I see an old jacket, you know, I've got an old one of our original hideouts in at the moment, which is probably in 1980s, and the young gentleman was actually given the jacket by his now late father, and he wants to restore it back to new, so he can carry on wearing it. So he said, God, if this jacket could talk, the stories that it could tell, because of the events and the rides and the life that it had. But with, you know, a little bit of care and attention, you know, we will get that jacket back up. We won't get it to brand new. We can't do it, and we kind of don't want to, because you kind of want to keep that the sort of integrity of it, and the authenticity of it. But for him, you know, he wants it to be cleaned, and we're going to put a new lining in it, so it will be quite like brand new eventually.
That's fantastic. That's some real history there then. Yes, retro jacket now then, but a real retro jacket. Okay, something I have to admit I didn't realise was that you are now making a range of textile clothing called High Pro. Now, given your commitment to high performance leather clothing, I'm guessing that you probably had to accept some kind of compromise when making the leathers. Am I correct in assuming that?
Well, no, I kind of didn't. For me, over the years, obviously, I'd honed our skill, and we've kind of got our leathers to that point where they're the best that I could get them. But I'd noticed that biking was really changing. It was moving, and a lot more people were using textiles. I was having to alter them to fit people, because obviously they don't do a made-to-measure service for them. So quite, you know, it was really my customers that were saying, come on, Kate, you know, we need something. But at the time, there was not really any decent fabrics. And because of our reputation, I wasn't really willing to make something that was at a lesser standard than what we were already producing with the leathers. Because I couldn't quite understand it at the time. When I'm a skier, and so I would look at the textile garments that were available to the motorcyclists and think, well, it's the same stuff as I'm throwing myself down a mountain in the snow. I wouldn't particularly want to be throwing myself down the road in this kit. And then it was, you know, it was just by chance, and things sort of move on, and I then found some fabrics that were going to work by layering them. So I worked with Dr. Woods before he retired, so he was, I think this was his last project actually, in developing a layered fabric system that could and would pass the same standard as the leathers had. So that's how we managed to get our high pro range through all the testing. So we've actually tested that to the same EN 13595 standard as our leathers are. So no, it's really good. So as I say, it was a layered system to make sure that we came up to the same abrasion resistance. I'd obviously had the same method of manufacture that we have with our leathers. So I used all of the sort of basics that we'd learned about the leathers, and we put it into the textiles and how that, making sure that they were at this high standard. As I say, we do a lot of work for the police, so we have quite a few police contracts, and they were quite keen to move away from leather, which is obviously the only thing that they could have. It was the only product that would pass this level 2 high standard. So they were very keen, obviously, to come on board with the textiles. And so now we're about 6 years in. We haven't found anything better, which is kind of good, but it kind of works. So we make the outside is the actual waterproofing, and then the inside, as I say, is these layers of ballistic nylon fabrics that all work together. They're about, I think it takes about 46 seconds to get through it, which is phenomenal.
That is impressive. Yes, that's very, very impressive. If you can achieve a high standard from textiles, dare I ask you why other manufacturers don't?
I actually think it comes down to cost. It's commercial cost at the end of the day. These fabrics are roughly, to us, obviously we're not manufacturing on the scale that they're manufacturing, so our cost will probably be a bit higher, but we're not looking at £3 and £4 a metre. These fabrics are £50 a metre. So I would suggest that not only is the cost of the fabrics would outweigh the commercial aspect of the garment, but also the method of manufacturing. So again, like we do with the leather, every seam is double stitch. We have to do that with our textile as well. So to make one garment takes twice as long as making, so you can make 2 in the same amount of time. And because we deal direct with the customer, we've not got any middleman trying to make their profit from the garment. Because this is the thing, I look at a lot of things, especially things like gloves, and I think, well, how on earth can anyone make these things? We used to actually make our own leather gloves at some point. Sorry. And we found that again, they just cost too much to manufacture. So with all the actual manufacturing costs, how can a pair of gloves be £120 when they probably would take us all day, maybe 2 days to actually make? Obviously we're not set up to do that sort of volume and things like that, but I think for us, when I look into the garments, and people don't generally want to pay, even if you're looking at £1,000, you're still looking, it's a lot of money. Whereas something like for our high pro range, we're trying to keep that at around, it's just over the £1,000 mark. But that's obviously manufactured here, and for about 25% extra, you get the made to measure service on top of that as well.
Okay, that's excellent. I'm sure I know a few people would be interested in that. Who do you kit out now? You've mentioned the police. I mean, presumably you still supply racers with suits.
Yes, yeah, we still do a lot of the sidecar teams. I still work with. I do a lot of, uh, as I say, more sidecar than solo. As a business, we haven't got probably the marketing department to be able to manufacture free suits for a lot of the top racers, and the cost is just is too much for us. We tend to get the guy who, he needs to go. He's got his racing, or he's doing his track day, but he needs to make sure he gets up and goes to work on Monday morning. He'll generally spend a little bit more money to make sure that he does. So yeah, we tend to do a bit more like that. But yeah, we do a lot of work for, as I say, a lot of the emergency services, and the MOD. We do the ambulance service as well. Yeah, so keeps us busy.
As you say, an insurance policy. How do you see Hideout developing over the next few years?
Well, as I say, at the moment, I think we're all living in a very strange time. We're, as I say, lucky enough to be able to still be working. We're still open for our key services, so we're still open for our police forces, and we've still got that sort of work. I mean, we're lucky that we're a small enough company that we can diversify, and we can change and adapt to our environments quite quickly. At the moment, my interests and my passions always about moving forward and trying to find, trying to get the leathers the safest, most comfortable. But also now with all the different fabrics that are coming on board, it has opened it out. So I'm now working on a full meshed summer suit, because again, I think that's a part of the market that I wouldn't necessarily want to wear any of the stuff myself that's out there that's fully aerated. It's such a compromise from going from being fully protected in leather to being in a mesh outfit. But again, through a lot of the fabrics that we're now using, or we've started to use in our high pro range, we can put that inside and make a safe. I think we can do a safer version of that. So we're working on that, which is called our system concept range. So that's my next little project. Keep me busy through this time, I think.
Okay, fascinating. I was going to ask if you have a shop, but I think I can see that the answer to that in the background. Where's it based, and what else do you sell apart from your own kit?
So yes, so I'm in the shop at the moment because the workshop is still inhabited. All my girls, or as much as I can at the moment with the 2 meter rule, are still working, so it's still busy in there. So yes, I've come into the shop today to come to talk to you, and to show you a little bit about the other bits and pieces that we've done. And again, I think what I've tried to do with the shop is, because we've repaired and I've altered majority, well, I'd say nearly every item or every brand and manufacturer's clothing, I tend to get an insight that most people wouldn't see. And so with the shop, what we've tried to do is, or what I've definitely done is I've only sell stuff that I would put our reputation behind. As you say earlier, I understand that some people haven't got the money for a full made to measure kit. So what I've tried to do with the shop is that we have a broad range of other manufacturers, that if someone would come in and they can try the bits on, if it doesn't quite fit them, I can still alter those, which might be a cheaper alternative than having a full made to measure kit. So we have Furigan their leather jackets, which I still think on the market are some of the best leather jackets. I don't do their textiles because, again, I don't think they're quite up to the standard that their leather jackets are. We sell Dane, which is a textile range. We do Rucker. With the boots, we do Daytona boots. I mean, I've been selling the Security Evo boots probably for 25 years since I started, and they're still the best boot in the world. There's still nothing that really compares to those for safety. Same with held gloves. We've been selling those since the 90s as well. And again, I can't find another manufacturer of gloves that beat their gloves. Are still the best in the world. So we also do different helmets. We do Schubert and Shoei, and we've now just taken on Nex as a helmet manufacturer as well. So yes, a whole little Aladdin's cave, based in the middle of nowhere, really. Our little barn is, it's in a village called Ashton, which is just outside Saffron Walden. We're lucky enough that we've got fabulous roads around here. So we've got lots of nice routes, and we're not in the middle of town, so we're smack bang in the middle of the country, which for me it's even nicer because I don't have to, I have to come here every day. I will say to my customers, my commute's 4.5 minutes, which is awful. And the worst thing that I sometimes come across is the odd tractor. So I'm very lucky and very fortunate to be out here. Beautiful part of the world.
Fantastic. Yeah, I run courses out that way from time to time when I'm sort of heading out from Essex. So maybe we'll have to drop in one day and see you.
Absolutely.
Final question then. Do you ride yourself?
Yes, yeah, I've got a Ducati Monster, safely tucked up in the garage at the moment. And I probably am a little bit of a fair weather rider, which I always get berated from my customers who say, you've got the most amazing kit. And you, as I said, there's no such thing as bad weather, it's just bad kit. And I've probably got the best choice in the world of kit that I can use. But as I say, yes, I tend to be a bit more of a fair weather rider these days. But as I say, around here, we've got some fabulous roads. So very lucky.
Well, I don't think there's anything too wrong with being a fair weather rider, quite frankly. I'm pretty much one myself these days. I spent far too many years as a motorcycle courier and a full-time basic trainer, being out in all weathers. So I'm quite happy to pick and choose my riding days now.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, Kate. Well, we've had a long chat. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think that our viewers will find that your insights absolutely fascinating. And once again, thank you very much indeed for sharing your time with me here on Elevenses. It's very kind of you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lovely to talk to you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye for now.